Welcome to this edition of Let's Chat America with your radio host, the Reverend Dr. L. Ronald Durham. This weekly program opens the phone lines for you to call in live and share your questions or comments. On this program, we discuss the latest news and opinions of things that may affect the lives of those here in Daytona Beach and the nation. So join Dr. Durham for today's program.
Good afternoon, beloved, and welcome to this edition of Let's Chat America. I'm your host, Dr. L. Ronald Durham. So delighted that you are tuned in wherever you are, your automobile, your car, or your office. It is just a true delight to have you tuned in today. If it is Thursday at 12 noon, you know what that means. The number one talk show in Volusia County and Daytona Beach is on the air. To those of you who are already coming in on the Facebook page, blessings to each and every one of you as well. Got a lot to talk about today. A big lineup of interesting facts that we want to share with each of you. And of course, we want you to call in if you would be so kind, since this is your radio broadcast and your radio program. You can call the number 386-868-0635. 386-868-0635 is the live number for you to call in. I see my uncle from North Carolina is on the Facebook Live page today. Greetings to you, Uncle Eugene, and all of you all over the country. We have listeners everywhere, not just here in the United States, but listeners around the world. So that lets you know, Let's Chat America is the place to be at 12 o'clock on Thursday, Eastern Standard Time. I want to begin the broadcast today with a big shout out to Marva. We see you on the Facebook Live feed. Blessings to you. Big shout out today to Cynthia Slater and the NAACP. J Music Carson, my main man, is on the Facebook Live feed today. But I want to start with Miss Cynthia Slater, the NAACP. Great job. A couple of days ago, I got a disturbing message that there was a book that they were using in our Volusia County school system, and it was a book about Rosa Parks. And thank you to all of you who are putting your messages on Facebook. Thank you, Uncle Eugene. But the book about Rosa Parks was taken out of the classroom. I was very upset, very disturbed by it. I sent a message to Ms. Slater and the NAACP, Sean King on the West Side NAACP, and today I learned that the book about Rosa Parks is now back in the classroom. We have so much going on with this this issue of critical race theory. It is something that we need to keep our eyes on. Scholars have been talking about critical race theory now for a little while, and our students need to know real American history. The claim about the Rosa Parks book being taken out of the classroom, supposedly the claim was that they didn't feel it was age appropriate for those 8-year-olds in the classroom. Well, you know, I started my children learning about real black history much earlier than 8 years old. They were 4, 5, and 6-year-olds when I was teaching them what really happened in this country around race and slavery. You know, people don't want to talk about it. Not black people don't want to talk about it. A lot of white folks don't want to talk about it. And I think they feel like we're trying to put them on some kind of guilt trip over what happened back in the 17 and 1800s. It's not about making them feel guilty. It's about revealing the real history and the real facts Blessings, Pastor Bradley. Saletha, we see you on the Facebook live feed as well. Not trying to make folks feel guilty about what happened back in the 17, 18, and early 1900s, and really right up to today when it comes to the expression of racism by many who are still ignorant of the fact that in this country, rights and privileges are to be extended to all people, regardless of race, color, or ethnicity, or your place of birth. If you've become a United States citizen, you should be receiving all of the rights and privileges that go with that citizenship. So kudos again, thank you to Miss Cynthia Slater, NAACP, all those who quickly got behind this issue, because if you want to really know about Rosa Parks, the only way that our kids, many of them, are going to know about her is if the school systems are giving them that kind of critical information about what she really did during the civil rights movement. Marcus, we see you on the Facebook Live feed as well. You know, the story about Rosa was that she, as you know, she was a seamstress. She rode the bus, and the story that makes folks feel good is that she was tired, her feet hurt, and so she decided that she was going to sit in the first seat that was available, and that seat was in the so-called white section of the bus. But we know what the true story is. She wasn't tired. She wasn't an old lady. She was a young woman, and she had been prepared by those in the movement during the 1960s. She had been worked with. She had been prepared to make this protest happen. And so the real story about Rosa Parks is what needs to be taught in our classrooms. And I don't think that 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds are too young to learn the truth about Black history, and those in the movement, like Mother Parks, who were instrumental in many of the breakthroughs and many of the laws that were changed as a result of their Black activism. Because it is Black activism that over the years have made many breakthroughs in Black lives and in Black communities with Black people. So I'm just excited that we can still see these victories. And let's not take our foot off the gas pedal. Let's keep our foot on the pedal when there are things that are not right in our communities. Let's bring them out. Let's highlight them. Let's shine a spotlight on them so that people know, number one, we're watching, and number two, we're not going to stand for many of those things that still linger in relationships between African Americans and those who are radical in their views that may be white. You're listening to Let's Chat America. We wanted to open at 9 minutes past the hour with that shout out to the NAACP. I'm on the air, so I can't call Cynthia, but I certainly let her know on my Facebook page that I was proud of the effort and the quick resolution of the Rosa Parks book that is now back in our elementary school. They need to know what she did, why she did it. Those who were with her how they helped her to get ready for that action, and for those who needed to benefit from that action, which is all African Americans across this country. If you'd like to comment on the opening of Let's Chat America, don't hesitate. Pick up the phone, call those 10 numbers. You know what they are: 386-868-0635, 386-868-0635. So let's stay on our theme. Brother Nichols, we see you on the Facebook Live feed. Let's stay on this black activism theme, because not only do we see that happening here in Volusia County with our NAACP action and the Rosa Parks book now back in the classroom, but if you were observing on the news yesterday, the former capital of the Confederacy, Richmond, Virginia, had a 6-story statue of Robert E. Lee, right in the center of Richmond. This statue had been there for over 100 years. And can you imagine 6 stories tall? That gives you an idea of how imposing this statue was, and what those who erected the statue wanted to make very clear, and that was white superiority and white supremacy was the reason this statue was erected in the first place, to give homage to this general of the Civil War who fought for the South. In fact, it was 156 years after the end of the Civil War and 131 years after the monument was dedicated that the Robert E. Lee Monument fell on yesterday in Richmond, Virginia. Well, it didn't fall. They literally cut the bolts loose that were holding the top of the statue to the base. The monument was the largest and highest, as I mentioned, of Richmond's Monument Avenue. Featuring that avenue, if you've ever been to Richmond, along Monument Avenue, there's a lot of mansions and tall trees in this former capital of the Confederacy. But it would never have happened, the dismantling of that statue would never have happened without demonstrations, without activism, without people being tear gassed in some cases, and weeks of protest following the murder of George Floyd. After much protest in the mostly blue-collar community of Richmond, the monument was decorated by activists with political messages and a call to action. After young and mostly African-American protesters, and it wasn't all African-American protesters. Let me make that very clear. There was a lot of support among white people in Virginia, in Richmond in particular, and those protests led the charge to remove the statue after the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on May 25th, 2020. And a renewed debate ignited around the removal of the ultimate symbol of the Confederacy, General Robert E. Lee. Now, I don't know how else you can slice it, but the Confederates rising up against the government of the United States is nothing more and nothing less than treason. Protesters in other cities began to topple Confederate monuments around the country in a heave-ho fashion. In June of 2020, days after the murder of Mr. Floyd, that sparked both national as well as international interest and protests everywhere. The story of the monument dedicated to General Lee and the removal began as community activists demonstrated, as I mentioned, around this structure, and many never believed, even though they were demonstrating, many of those activists never believed that they would see the day come when that statue would be taken down. Community members always believed the issue was bigger than the statue. Paris, 22 of Richmond, who was part of the effort, said, quote, "I knew they said it was going to come down, but I really didn't believe it," end quote. Princess Blanding also told the Griot, which is where this segment of our broadcast comes from, thegriot.com, Princess Blanding told the Griot, quote, "To me, it's very important that we understand that we have to look into things deeper, which they don't expect us to do. In our celebration, they were hoping that they wouldn't notice that they removed all the memorials to our lost brothers and sisters." Blanding is the first black woman in Virginia's history to be on the ballot this November. Blanding's brother, who is Market David Peters, who was a biology teacher, was killed by a Richmond police officer back in 2018 when he had a mental health crisis. The area around what was the space that occupied the Lee Monument was soon dubbed as Marcus David Peters Circle after protests began in the summer of 2020. Blanding added, quote, "Our fight to remove this monument has been a long time coming. It was people, power, that got this monument down, not our elected officials," end quote. It wasn't easy for those everyday Richmonders to get a close view of the monument's historic removal. Several of those activists slept overnight in front of the building that accessed through a narrow alleyway leading into a parking lot at 1805 Monument Avenue, which was close to the statue. They would later set up a barbecue, a table of snacks, and a small printed sign shop that produced a "Giddy Up Loser" sign to hand out to onlookers for free. Several members of the Black Lives Matter movement and other witnesses, or others who were witnessing the statue removal, began to chant, "Whose street? Our street," and sang goodbye to the 20-foot-high statue of Lee as it was lifted from its base at 8:58 a.m. And unlike so many other statues around the country, it was removed in the broad morning daylight. The absence of Lee on Richmond's landscape was a long time coming. Activists will likely keep the pressure on for more substantive change in a city in need of policy answers on jobs, affordable housing, and the cycle of poverty there in Richmond. Harlan, we see you on the Facebook Live feed. To all of you who are listening and tuned in, we're happy to have you on the broadcast today. This is Let's Chat America. I'm your host, Dr. L. Ronald Durham, and our first two segments have really been revolving around activism, black activism, right here in our own Volusia County, the removal of a Rosa Parks book from our school system. NAACP jumped on it quickly. That book is now back in the classroom. Children are getting the correct information. Kristen, we see you on the Facebook Live feed as well. And don't be embarrassed, because the history of African Americans has been and still continues to be in so many cases kept out of the mainstream of education. You get bits and pieces of black history, but real black history, the black history that our ancestors lived through. Those are the things that people are fighting for, to get into the classroom so that there is a better understanding of what African Americans had to deal with, went through, fought for in order for these changes to take place. And you're right, Kristen. The feel-good version about Rosa Parks that I talked about at the beginning, her just being an old lady who was tired and wanted to sit at the first seat that she could get to, that's the feel-good version about Rosa Parks. But the real Rosa Parks was groomed for that action. She was made ready for whatever may have happened during that time, including the possibility of being beaten and arrested, which she was. But there were those that got her prepared for the action that she took, because it was deliberate, it was on purpose, and it served its purpose. That the discrimination in the bus system that did not allow black folk to sit up front, that had to be dealt with, that had to be confronted, just like lunch counters had to be confronted, and so many other of the Jim Crow obstacles that were put in the way of African Americans so that they did not feel like they were really citizens of this country. And that certainly brings me to the segue of my next segment, because I want to talk about some frontline black soldiers. And those of you who follow my Facebook page, you saw a post that I made yesterday about these frontline black soldiers who fought during World War I. This is going way back, World War I. They are now finally going to receive, although they are not with us anymore, posthumously they are receiving the Congressional Gold Medal. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, it's 23 minutes past the hour. I'm going to talk about these black soldiers a little bit of a history lesson about who they were, and the struggles that they had during World War I as black soldiers in the United States military. Pick up the phone if you want to join this conversation. Maybe you had family members who served in the military, maybe not in World War I, but maybe in World War II, or the Korean conflict, or the Vietnam War, or in Afghanistan, or Iraq. We'd love to talk to you about, maybe you served in one of those wars or one of those conflicts. Pick up the phone, give us a call, 386-868-0635, 386-868-0635. You may have had family members who served in one of those conflicts, or who may be serving right now in the military here in the United States. But these black soldiers who fought during World War I, they were called the Harlem Hellfighters. Maybe you never heard that term before, but these group of black men, they were the first African American unit to fight in World War I. And they will now, as I mentioned, they're finally, after all of these years that have gone by, they will finally receive some national recognition in this country after their contributions have largely been ignored for more than 100 years. They were the 369th Infantry Regiment, and they overcame unimaginable discrimination and neglect to earn their infamous nickname and become one of the most decorated units during World War I. But before they got to fight over there, there was a song that was written called Over There. Before they got to fight over there, the men of the 369th had to fight every day right here. Now, more than 100 years after this unit helped the United States win World War I, they have now been honored or will be honored with a Congressional Gold Medal, according to CNN. Last week, President Joe Biden signed the Harlem Hellfighters Congressional Gold Medal Act into law, which will posthumously, as I said, honor the unit that served during that conflict. NBC also reported that family members of the 369th Infantry Regiment will receive replicas of the prestigious medal. Democrat Representative Tom Susi of New York, who sponsored the bill, said in a statement, quote, "It is never too late to do the right thing. Awarding the Harlem Hellfighters the Congressional Gold Medal ensures that generations of Americans will now fully comprehend the selfish service, sacrifices, and heroism displayed by these men in spite of the pervasive racism and segregation of that time," end quote. The co-sponsor of the bill was Ohio Representative Joyce Beatty. She's the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and Ms. Beatty said, quote, "The Harlem Hellfighters risk life and limb in defense of an America that discriminated against them," end quote. Yet the Hellfighters helped liberate Western Europe and secure victory for our allied forces. More than 100 years after these brave men fought so valiantly, it's nice to see the congressional colleagues and President Biden honoring them for their exemplary service on behalf of a very grateful nation. I want to talk a little bit about this group. If you want to join my conversation, pick up the phone, dial those numbers, 386-868-0635. That's 386-868-0635. The 369th Infantry Regiment fought so hard and with such tenacity that they were dubbed by the enemy as the Harlem Hellfighters. The German troops gave them that name after facing them in combat. The 369th became the first American unit to be cited with the French Croix de Guerre. A Croix de Guerre is a medal that the French give for valiant fighting during war. Members of the regiment were awarded one Medal of Honor and many Distinguished Service Crosses. While white units leaving New York for Europe, if you can picture it in your mind, obviously those white units left to great fanfare. They embarked on their ships with bands playing, but this was not the case, of course, for the Harlem Hellfighters, an issue that plagued the soldiers during their entire tour of World War I. The 369th Regiment, in fact, had to train, now listen to this, these men going to war in Europe had to train with secondhand uniforms, and watch this. Instead of giving them rifles to train, they gave them broomsticks to train with. How demeaning and hateful was that? Author Max Brooks, who collaborated with artist Kanan White to create the graphic novel that is called The Harlem Hellfighters, told the Griot back in 2014 that what makes World War I significant in the black man's struggle for recognition is that the war was fought under the banner of freedom and democracy, when there was no outward attempt to offer freedom and democracy to the black men serving in the armed forces. So they had this dichotomy of going to war to fight for freedom and democracy, and yet right here in their homes where they lived in the United States, that same freedom and democracy was not extended to them. Before the 369th was formed, any black man who wanted to actually fight in what was called, quote, the Great War, had to enlist in Canadian or French units to fight. Blacks in America's military had previously been detailed to servants units, cleanup units. They were behind the lines, not on the front lines, or they were right here in the United States cooking, cleaning, those kinds of menial tasks while they were in the military before the 369th came into being. Once World War I started, many African Americans believed that their valor on the battlefield would be rewarded with a push to turn the tide of discrimination here in America against blacks in the United States. Brooks, author of the popular World War Z and Zombie Survival Guide, previously told CNN the Hellfighters were, quote, set up to fail by their own government and did not receive the kind of valor, the kind of honor that they did deserve. Don't know if you knew about the Harlem Hellfighters, the 369th Regiment that came out of Harlem, New York. Pick up the phone, give me a call, tell me what you think. I'd love to get your thoughts. 386-868-0635. That's what critical race theory is trying to get into our classrooms. Real stories about real events that happened in black history. I don't understand why so many Caucasians, white Americans, are fighting to have the truth about black history taught in the classroom. It doesn't really make sense to me on one level, but on the other level, I do believe that it's all about them feeling guilty. And so, unfortunately, we have to kind of understand that. If you'd like to pick up a phone, give us a call. The number to call is 386-868-0635. That's 386-868-0635. Our segments so far have been kind of about, history, black history, if you will. We will be coming up to Black History Month in just a little while. And During that month, we'll try to give at least one history fact each and every week. Little known history facts that many of us may not have heard of, like the 369th Infantry Group called the Harlem Hellfighters out of New York. Fascinating group of men who really demonstrated extreme heroism, extreme valor, and were given their name by their German opponents, the enemy. The Germans gave them that name of the Harlem Hellfighters because they were so fierce on the battlefield. And those are the kind of things that we need to continue to have shared in our classrooms, in our school systems, so that, one, there is a sense of pride by African Americans of the accomplishments of those things that really set us apart in so many ways, and also just so that the truth of history is given in the right way. I think so many times the fight is, or the discussion is about, rather, how this will impact the minds of children or young people, young adults. In my opinion, when you are given correct information and the knowledge that you acquire only serves to make you more informed, more aware, and better able to discuss history from the proper perspective. When you don't know it, when it is kept from you, when it is denied to be given to you, that only serves, it really serves no real purpose other than that you will not have the information that you should about your own history and movement that happened over all of those years. The civil rights groups in Texas and lawmakers in Texas are vowing to fight back against the Texas anti-voting laws. And this, again, is from thegrio.com. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund President Sharon Eiffel has launched a warning shot to Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott minutes after he signed a sweeping, and when I say sweeping, I mean it is more than just sweeping, it is a radical new voting rights bill that he signed into law back on Tuesday. She said, quote, "We're suing," end quote. She tweeted that on Tuesday. The new law places several hurdles in front of the ballot box and only scratches the surface of voting disparities on the horizon. More restrictions are underway now as part of a series of legislative moves by the GOP to change or to changing voting access in the state of Texas. Now, the reason I'm sharing this is because usually when one GOP majority legislature does something like this, the ripple effect begins almost immediately. And by ripple effect, what I mean are copycat laws are going to be coming down the pike. You can believe that. Once Texas has put this voting rights or anti-voting law, it's not voting rights by any stretch of the imagination, it's anti-voting, and once they pass this, other other GOP majority legislatures are going to copy what they've seen. After weeks of resistance by Texas Democrat state lawmakers, and you can remember a few weeks ago, the entire delegation of Texas, Democratic delegation of Texas, fled the state, got on buses, got on planes, and came to Washington, D.C. And members of Congress and civil rights activists, this new law serves as added coals to a fast-burning fire among legacy organizations. NAACP President Derek Johnson, with a photo of Governor Abbott signing the new voting law, tweeted, quote, "White supremacy, definition of white supremacy, the belief that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. Black folks were suppressed today. Texas Governor Abbott has intentionally signed away democracy for so many. We are disgusted. This voter suppression bill is undemocratic, un-American, and even violates core conservative principles," end quote. That quote was made by the NAACP President Derek Johnson. As the nation's oldest civil rights group, the NAACP has been on the front lines of the push to lift the filibuster to secure passing votes for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the For the People Act, which still remains stalled in the United States Senate. Since 2013, after the U.S. Supreme Court weakened Section 5, and I talked about this in my talk at the Community Unitarian Universalist Church in New Smyrna Beach on Sunday, my topic was about African Americans and voting rights. And during my speech, I talked about Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which ended the requirement that states clear changes in the voting laws with the federal government. Over 750 polling places have closed in the United States. That Section 5 law, which was known as pre-clearance, the southern states who had a history of denying African Americans full access to the polls had to get pre-clearance from the federal government or from Congress if they were going to enact new laws in their states around voter suppression and voting rights. What the Supreme Court did back in 2013 was they gutted the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and in particular, Section 5 of that voting rights bill. Most recently, the court decided to strike down voting restrictions only when they impose disproportionate burdens on minority voters. John Greenbaum, deputy director at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law, wrote, quote, "SB 1 places restrictions on several methods of voting that were overwhelmingly used by voters of color." And you know what some of those were. Early voting is one, voting by mail is another. Governor Abbott of Texas and Texas Republicans argued that SB 1, which is now law, will prevent voter fraud. That was the whole push that Texas gave behind this bill that they passed, was that it would prevent voter fraud. Now, you know where that came from. That came from the loss of number 45 and that election back in 2020 when Joseph R. Biden handily defeated him, which he could not take. And as a result, he claimed that the election was rigged, that the election was stolen, and so began to propagate the big lie. And thank you, Cheryl. We see your post on the Facebook Live feed. Appreciate you so much. Keep us in your prayers. So all of this is a result of the big lie that the GOP has gotten behind and especially in many of the southern states in this country. And they are coming up with these supposed, finding an issue that doesn't exist or trying to correct an issue that does not exist, all to appease number 45 over in Mar-a-Lago so that they can continue to kiss his ring and bow down to him and serve him as if he was a king. I'd love to get your comment on this segment of the program. We are 46 minutes past the hour. The hour is going so quick today. Love to get you to call me. Tell me what you think. The number to call is 386-868-0635. That's 386-868-0635. The new Texas law also bans, listen to this, it also bans online voter registration and creates a requirement that a person must be deputized to register voters. The new law mandates that a person can vote using, listen to this, this new law in Texas says that you can vote using a gun permit. You can have a gun permit and vote and be registered to vote in Texas, but you cannot use a student identification card and be registered to vote. Now, that's how convoluted this new law in Texas is. Use your gun permit. That'll get you to be registered to vote, but don't walk in there with a student ID card from the University of Texas that says that you're a resident of the state of Texas, you're going to school in Texas, you're over the age necessary to qualify to vote. Don't use that student ID card. Can't use that. But if you got a gun permit, you can go ahead and get registered to vote. Representative Al Green, Democrat of Texas, said in a statement to the Griot, quote, "Texas has said no to 24-hour voting and drive-through voting. But there's no reason to ban either. They weren't creating a hardship for the people in the state of Texas. On the contrary, it was making it easier to vote. You can't say you're making voting easier by making it more difficult. That's an oxymoron. Voting should be free, fair, and accessible. We need to eliminate obstacles to voting and ensure people have access to the polls. We find that across this country, there are many states that are doing whatever they can to throw up roadblocks to voting," end quote, by Representative Al Green from Texas. Well, you know where this is coming from. The more people that vote, Republicans learned, or they've really been learning it for many election cycles. This is not something new that is hitting them in the face. They've been seeing the trend over several election cycles that the more access there is to voting, the less, or those who are Republicans generally begin to lose. When you open it up for more people to have access to voting, they know they lose. Kristen, we see your comment on the Facebook live feed. You're right. The Republicans are the ones with the gun permits, which is why they will allow gun permits to be used to register to vote. They're the ones who have them. So voting rights was once bipartisan, as then President George W. Bush reauthorized the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And voting rights activist LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, continues to say voting now in 2021 is the same as it was in 1964, with restrictive voter laws in states and twice the gutting of the Voting Rights Act by the U.S. Supreme Court. Texas has now followed both Georgia and Florida, good old Florida, in passing restrictive voting laws. The legislative effort comes temporarily months after President Joseph R. Biden defeated number 45 last November by over 7 million votes. Trump and his supporters have continued to assert the 2020 election was stolen, and there is absolutely no evidence or proof that the election was stolen from number 45. I did mention his name. I've got to put $1 in the curse jar. And I know Kristen is on top of that. Representative Joaquin Castro, in a blunt statement, said, quote, Texas Republicans continue their assault on democracy and made it harder for Texans to vote, motivated by the same big lie of widespread voter fraud that led to a deadly attack at the United States Capitol. And he is talking about, obviously, January 6th. And you do know, yeah, you're right, Kristen. I got to put some money in the curse jar. Can't mention number 45 by his name. Please call me back. I seem to have missed a call. Please call me right back. I don't know how I missed your call. 386-868-0635. 386-868-0635. Please call me right back. I missed your call. I apologize for that. But if you call me right back, we still have a few minutes for you to join the conversation. Give me a call right back. 386-868-0635. So, that we see what is going on with these voter suppression laws in the southern states, Florida, Georgia, Texas, and there will be more when these GOP legislators see what one is doing. They immediately begin the process of doing the same thing. And so we're going to see it raising its head more and more and more. You would think we were back in the 1860s or 1850s with some of these tactics that are being used to keep African Americans and other minorities from accessing the polls and giving more access rather than less. I mean, what is there can only be one reason why access is being limited. I mean, it doesn't take a Harvard degree to figure out that denying access or restricting access to the polls allows fewer of your opposition to vote your constituents out of office. Or not your constituents, but vote your colleagues, rather, out of office. And so, it's all about big business, catering to big business, limiting access from the small individuals like you and me, who lawmakers are or should be concerned about, because it is the people that put them into office in many instances. In every instance, it is the people. And when they get to those positions, unfortunately, not all of them, but some of them just forget who it was that put them into office, who it is that they should be concerned about, what it is that their communities need in order to grow and thrive and prosper. They forget. They have amnesia. It is as if the people do not exist in many of their thought processes. They are only concerned about their big donors, those who can put large amounts into their campaign finances. And again, we see the Supreme Court's hand in that action as well, allowing businesses this ability to put a lot of money, dark money that isn't traced, into these campaigns, and thereby giving them the ability to put up more billboards, send out more mailings, and get their name into our living rooms. And money has the ability to corrupt, in many cases, elections and candidates, which is unfortunate. Doesn't happen to every candidate by any means or any stretch of the imagination, but there are those whom it affects adversely, and as a result, we wind up with the people losing access to many of the rights and privileges that should be for every American to enjoy in this country. 58 minutes past the hour of 12 noon. You've been listening to Let's Chat America. I apologize for that person who has been trying to call me. I don't know what's going on with our phone system today. Wilbert, we see you on the Facebook Live feed, and those of you who have hung in there with me for the full hour, thank you so much for listening to our broadcast today. Again, we do want to shout out the NAACP and Miss Cynthia Slater for getting the book on Rosa Parks that I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast. There was a book by Rosa Parks removed from the classroom, and the NAACP jumped right on it. I was contacted as well, but they were able to get the book back into the classroom about our beloved Rosa Parks, what she stood for, what she accomplished, and those are the kinds of lessons that our school children, young, middle school children, high school children, they should be learning the true, correct history of what many African American activists fought for, and many of those things that were denied to African Americans strictly on the basis of the color of their skin, those lessons need to be taught so that our children understand the struggle, the awesome courage of so many who stood up against the oppression and the oppressor, and prevailed and won victory after victory in so many cases. The only way that we're going to have significant change in this country is for there to be significant education given about the struggles and the hardships of minorities and others who simply wanted to have the same equal access and the same equal benefit. You've been listening to Let's Chat America. Cheryl, we thank you for your prayers on the Facebook Live feed. Blessings to you as well. It is past the hour of 1 o'clock. I've got to go, but Lord willing, same time, same place, next Thursday, 12 noon, I'll be right here. Love you.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
We hope you have enjoyed today's program here on Let's Chat America, broadcast from the world's most famous beach. To request Dr. Durham to speak at your event, please call 386-451-5114. Again, that's 386-451-5114. Tune in next Thursday, 12 noon, for another powerful program hour here on Joy 106.3 FM.
WAIGLP, Daytona Beach, Joy 106.3.